years and years ago, when I started in IT, there was the shadow IT from people.
Yeah.
And there's the shadow IT again, and there will be shadow IT tomorrow. So you can't just rely on the tools.
I think I've completely eradicated NTLM, and then you find it's 40% of their authentication.
Yeah.
Or we found a particular service account which was denied authentication 1.9 billion times in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Right? And you would have thought that would have been spotted, right? That seems fairly obvious, but it's not the way. I think even these relatively superficial things are difficult to find.
It used to be, well, you were in HR, you work here, but that's not the case anymore. It's everybody works in an organization.
Yeah.
I think that's the majority of the problem.
It's not about the best performance of the best player, but it's about the worst performance of the worst player.
Welcome to this Xalient Talks podcast, where we talk about all things identity, security and networking related. I'm joined here today by Rob Ainscough, who's the Chief Identity Security Advisor at Silverfort, and our own Jos Akkermans, our Field CTO. And we're going to talk a little bit today about something we've just done a lunch and learn event on, which is a customer event we do here in The Hague, the Discovery Challenge around identity. Before we kind of get into that a little bit and the challenges of that, do you want to introduce yourself, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Rob Ainscough, as Marty said, so Chief Identity Security Advisor at Silverfort. For those of you who don't know Silverfort, we're all about protecting identities. So I joined the Silverfort team at the turn of the year, so about 10 months now. Mm-hmm. Absolutely flown by. And my job is really to help people understand what identity security looks like, how they can win in it, how they can succeed in it. It's a really difficult discipline. I've come from a practitioner perspective, so previously at a really large retailer where I ran the IAM program for about 10 years. So come to the other side now to try and help as many companies as possible.
Brilliant. Gartner talk about this as the kind of invisible identity crisis, don't they? But let's maybe start with the basics, Jos. So the Discovery Challenge, what is this? Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, it's not new, but it is a challenge. And if you look at the current breaches, for example, Marks & Spencer, that happened in April this year, it was breached by an outsourced service desk. And most organizations struggle with their identities and their outsourced identities, their contractors, their partners, their developers, the different identity types, identity life cycles they have, the different processes they have. It's very difficult to get a grasp on everybody who works in your organization. And that's just the human side. And then there's also the non-human side that is emerging rapidly. Yeah. It keeps growing. It keeps from API keys to service accounts. It's growing and growing and growing. And I think that largest the problem. It used to be, well, you were in HR, you work here, but that's not the case anymore. It's everybody works in an organization. Yeah. I think that's the majority of the problem.
Yeah, and how do you see it, Rob?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for me it's a really interesting one because I'm not sure a lot has actually changed in our identity environment. So we talk about the rise of machine identities, NHIs. For me, it's not a new phenomenon, right? But it's something which is something we're really trying to understand right now and kind of play catch up with, because identity is now the number one place for attackers to go. It's the number one route in. And it means that we've got slightly different requirements, slightly different needs in terms of identity security that I think we're playing catch up with a little bit as an industry.
And where do you see these blind spots hiding, Jos? Is it, and I guess my question is a little bit, is this a tooling issue or is it an organizational and process issue?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. And if you look at the tooling aspects, there's still a lot of organizations, they think when they bought a tool that they've completed, mission accomplished, we've bought a tool. Yeah. And that's not the case. And if you look how the way humans behave, humans innovate, especially the IT persons, they innovate, they want to try new things. I was in a customer yesterday and we talked about passkeys. And in their new enrollment, they want to use passkeys, and like many more that are using it. And their developers had already spin up an environment and are testing it. Nobody knows. There's no governance around it. They're just testing it. And from testing becomes more and goes a bit in production, goes a redesign, goes a bit in production again, and nobody knows. So years and years ago, when I started in IT, there was the shadow IT from people. Yeah. And there's the shadow ID again, and there will be shadow ID tomorrow. So you can't just rely on the tools. You have to talk to your employees and how do you do things. Talk to your subject matter experts. Make sure that your service management processes are in place to create a flow in the life cycles of applications and things you do, and make it easier for them.
Yeah. When you do, I mean, maybe a good one for you, Rob, when you see customers that do make this discovery and start seeing these blind spots, what's their reaction when they first see these? Is this a surprise to them, or are these things they've put to the back of their mind?
As I say, I've been doing this job 10 months, and I've had more than one occasion where it's been utter surprise. So whether that's, I think I've completely eradicated NTLM, and then you find it's 40% of their authentication. Yeah. Or we found a particular service account which was denied authentication 1.9 billion times in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Right? And you would have thought that would have been spotted, right? That seems fairly obvious, but it's not the way. I think even these relatively superficial things are difficult to find. And I think, coming back to your question, is it about technology? Well, yes, you need the right technology, but as you said, it's about fit with your organization. Fit technically, but also fit with the culture, right? If you've got an operational, get it done culture, you need tooling that's going to reflect that and have that be understood. So I think it's really important that we're using the right tools for the right businesses and the right needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess once we get past that discovery challenge, and once we've eradicated, let's say, some of the blind spots at this point, what are the steps we need to take to protect? How do you kind of attack that? Is it a big job? Are there quick wins? How do you see that, Jos?
Yeah, and that's what most organizations struggle with, because they all know about like service accounts. Service accounts is a problem in most organizations. Yeah. And from a compliance perspective, they need to have an owner. Service accounts need to have an owner. But having an owner on service accounts doesn't improve your security. It's a start to improve your security. Yeah. But on itself doesn't, a hacker doesn't care if the service account is owned by someone or not. They care about, is the service account is the password still valid? Has it access to a lot of different systems? Those are things is it using NTLM? Those are things that a hacker can use. So when you have your discovery in place and you go all your landscape, knowing what to do and knowing what to do best is something organizations struggle with. And then they buy a pen tool. They say, well, now I've got a pen tool and everything should fit in the pen tool. Yeah. But that's the dream of a silver bullet for your security. That's not working anymore. So there are several things you can do based on the risk and based on the most efficient way of protecting it. And there can be a lot of things. There can be like authentication firewalling to just make sure that you've got the correct global policy on it, or that you indeed vault your accounts, or that you implement MFA, or there are multiple things you can do to protect what you find.
And that's a really good point. There's a lot that can be done here. So can you give us some insights, Rob, maybe on what practical first steps you would maybe advise customers?
Yeah, so the way I think about this, I watch a ton of team sports, way more than my wife is happy with, unfortunately, especially American football. Nice 3-hour break for me there. So when they talk about success in sports, they really talk about the floor defining success rather than the ceiling. So it's not about the best performance of the best player, but it's about the worst performance of the worst player that's going to define that success. And I think really thinking about what you care about and how you bring a base level of protection and understanding to that thing. So whether it's making sure you've got protections for your non-human accounts that you know about, or making sure you've got MFA in place at the baseline, that's a really good first step if you're worried about your exposure. Because, as you said, compliance doesn't equal security. They're two different things. And the things that get you compliant aren't necessarily the things that get you secure. And it's really important to think about that baseline, because once you've built a baseline, once you've got something you can measure, you can describe to your executive that takes the top of the risk, then you can start to grow and dream about where I can push this, where can I take that ceiling.
Yeah, and I'm interested in that point a little bit, because I think sometimes with these big programs, it can maybe be a bit overwhelming for some organizations. Yeah. So is there a balance that has to be struck between really making progress at a kind of fast rate, but also keeping the business going, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I think if you look at Gartner, for example, or if you talk about customers about their identity programs, they talk about identity programs because it's not a project, it's a program.
Yeah.
And with that, they often mean it's going to take a long time. It's going to be 8 years, it's going to be 5 years. And if you, from the start to the end, that can be a long journey. Because you start with a tool and haven't got an idea of your environment. You haven't done your discovery, you haven't done your life cycles. You don't know anything, and you just bought a tool. And then you're going to find out, and you're going to change, and you find out, and you change, you're going to find out again. And that keeps going on for quite a while. So we always advise organizations to make sure, start with the discovery. Insights lead to improvements. Make sure that you know what you have. You know your identity life cycles, know your machine identities, know your certificates, know whatever you're going to put in your program, know where you are on what you want to achieve. And then you can, from there, you can start improving. And then you can make a distinguish between these are my low-hanging fruits. This is efficient. This I can do to show the business that we are improving. This is going to be difficult. We haven't got anything clue on our outdoor certificates, or we haven't got a clue on our quantum resilience. Well, that's something you're going to find out then, and while running the program. So instead of just starting and hoping for the best, you're going to start with the things you need to do and prioritize, and that will make your program, I think, a lot more successful.
Yeah. Any thoughts from you?
I think it's really interesting because over the course of my kind of 10 years running the identity program, our approach evolved significantly. And as we started out, I was pretty young. I was pretty confident that we could make a change, but there was no real plan at that stage. And the path will become clear was kind of our plan, because we had such low visibility of what were all the problems that were out there. What does the business care about? What's really important for us to solve right now? Looking at that now, we're slightly more maturized, and having done that, I think there's two things I'd focus on. So once you've got that discovery in place, once you understand what's out there, really then getting control of identity life cycles so that you start to take control of the future success, but also look at protection, look at how you become proactive, how you make sure you're not relying on usernames and passwords anywhere as far as possible, and then growing from there. And just trying to be strategic about it, because I think a lot of people struggle with the discovery and the visibility that allows them to decide what's most important to their business. And that's a really big challenge.
Yeah. There's one area that I'm really interested in, because I'm hearing a lot about this at the moment, and I think this would be something really useful for our listeners to talk specifically about now, is a little bit around the non-human identities specifically, and the scale of that challenge. Do you want to reflect a little bit on that for us, the scale of that challenge, and
so
can address that?
I think there's a few things here. So NHIs aren't exactly new. They have been around for a number of years. We've had service accounts for a long time, but what we're seeing is more diversity as we've moved into cloud. We've got more API keys, tokens, those kind of things that we have to think about.
And that's just driving growth, really.
Exactly. We're seeing a significant growth in the number and diversity of them, but also the pace, right? And it's a theme that we're seeing across identity is greater speed. And I think it's a really interesting thought experiment, actually. If all of my things were driven by NHIs or agentic AI, as a form of that, what would my identity posture and program need to look like? What would it need to deliver to do that at machine speed? Because if it works for NHI, it will surely work at human speed too. So again, it comes down to the same things of understanding what's out there broadly, and then thinking about how you want to protect it based on your risk, right? And understanding that is a really key thing.
Yeah. And when you're working with our customers, Jos, are you seeing, are people dealing with non-human identities as effectively as they are users at the moment, or is there a bit of catch-up?
I think a lot of organizations are compliance focused, and they are compliance driven. I mean, they're not always compliance focused, but they are compliance driven. And if you look at a couple of years ago, the compliance focus was on fraud. Even years ago, look at Enron, for example. And I think that shifted to the non-human identities, to the service accounts, to the certificates, amplified by regulation for changing of certificates. So now they have a focus on the machine identity, and some organizations, they just struggle with it. They don't know where they are, and as soon as they know where they are, they don't know how to protect them. And that's also like your previous question, and also what Rob explained, having a clear path and a plan and how to deal with them, how to deal with the different elements of the machine identities and the different types of machine identities. I think that can be a real benefit for an organization.
Yeah, and just to add, I think the only thing I'd say on NHI, it's really important not to treat them as something totally different, right? You can't really completely separate your NHI and how you're treating humans or all the technologies you're using to understand human authentication and what's going on in your environment. So I think it's really important that they're a part of the puzzle, but a part of a much bigger and more complex puzzle that really we need to put together and be able to correlate and bring together to really understand what's going on in identity land and then take control of it. So I think it's really important that that's part of a much bigger picture that we're building.
There's a phrase kind of that I'm hearing a lot, identity first. And I guess alongside that a little bit, kind of identity is the new perimeter, for example. So if you take those phrases a little bit and help our listeners a little bit here, what does that look like? So if you have a mature identity first strategy, let's say, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, great question. So I think the big evolution that we're starting to see and we'll probably see over the next 5 years is less thinking about identity as protecting individual accounts or the access that they have, but more about broadly setting rules of the game like a network does, right? So if we're thinking in identity in those terms, well, what do we want to allow and what do we definitely not want to allow? You know, if there's unusual behavior or if a system that never normally talks to another system starts talking to it, is that okay? Do we want to allow that by default or do we want to deny it by default? So I think what we're going to see is a lot more of setting of the rules of the game, the guardrails of identity that really start to contain risk. Because I think the way I see it, and I've seen an identity attack happen, is that it's really about stopping an individual account compromise from becoming systemic.
Yeah.
Right. It's not really about preventing every single account compromise. I think some companies are just too large and the attackers are just too innovative
It's
and
minimizing
exploiting
the
people.
damage.
It's about minimizing harm and containing that risk in line with your risk appetite. I think that's the big change we'll see over the next few years, is thinking of it much more like a network technology about risk containment and shaping of the identity environment and its rules.
Yeah, 100% agree. Absolutely. And I think there's the other aspect is also protecting your identity landscape as your first barrier. And there's still a lot of things to gain, I think. And an example, also based on, for example, Marks and Spencer again, they had MFA bypass, and that's a common attack vector at the moment. MFA used to be the holy grail, and now they've got MFA bypass. But if your privileged access management solution is depending on the same MFA as your user, as soon as your user MFA is bypassed, so is your privileged access management system. So why not have a FIDO2 token or another type of MFA in there? So like a second barrier. But also if you've got your IJ environment and your PAM environment connected to each other, and you've got automated provisioning to your AD, for example. No, I can do an access request for the main admin account, and there's a IJ tool workflow, and it will be automatically provisioned. But so my complete domain admin posture is depending on my IJ solution. So if I breach my IJ solution, I'm a domain admin.
Yeah.
Am I protecting my IJ solution with a PAM solution, or am I thinking about protecting it with my SIEM or whatever? Is it my first strategy to protect my identity landscape? So I think it's looking at authentication as a network perspective, but also making sure that my identity landscape is protected the best, because that's where my holy grail is.
Yeah.
To your point, and just extending on it, it's about being threat-led, right? Understanding what those threat vectors look like, having a good view of that and what it might look like for you, and then finding those pinch points where you might see those transitions, right?
Definitely.
From compromise of MFA here leading into your privileged tier, and just thinking on attacker terms. It's a totally different mindset to a compliance mindset when it comes to identity. You've really got to dial into it. But I think that's what we'll see more from practitioners as they become more security focused and more like those network teams, I think we'll see more of that threat-led thinking.
Yeah, it makes sense. And like you say, the environment's always changing, the threats are changing. So this becomes something of a continuous, as we talked about before, we know with identity, it's a program, it's not a project, it's never done. And I guess continuous discovery is good behavior.
100%. And I think it's almost, for me, it's more than a program, it's a product, right? Because fundamentally, where identity works really well, it's because it enables the business, it enables developers, it enables you to be secure without being onerous. Yeah. And I think it really understands your point earlier, a real understanding of the business, of your stakeholders, of their needs, and finding the right technologies to meet those needs rather than trying to impose standards over the top. So I think it's really about understanding it so that you can support the business and its growth whilst being secure.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. So I think both of you were at the Gartner Summit.
Yeah.
So what any learnings from that specifically from either of you?
I think what struck me, not just at that event, but more widely since I've joined the company, is that there's such commonality for people dealing with identity and identity risk in different sectors and different geographies. There's such common challenges, for example, around privileged access management, and a lot of questions there about how to succeed in it, how to get comfortable with that risk, how to break out of the cycle of where they're at the moment. So for me, that was the big conversation that was happening, and such commonality there between geographies and industries as well.
Yeah, and I also think that if you look at a couple of years ago, it was about identity first and your identity first strategy. That's what you should do, identity first. And if I look at Gartner now in the different sessions, they're like, you're all doing that. Yeah. So they assume that you're all doing that because it's not new anymore. If you haven't started with identity first strategy, then you are 3 years behind. So that's also what Gartner assumes. So it was also about the human aspect and the transition for humans and the trust aspect. And I think that's also really important, that you not only start thinking about your security risk, because we're all risk-minded, but also in when can I trust and who can I trust and how do they work together? So it was a really valuable event. Absolutely.
Okay. So just to wrap up then, if I were to ask you both for a single piece of advice for our listeners out there embarking on this journey, any thoughts, Rob?
I think the key for me is to be proactive in identity. So, attacker breakout times are really falling. Identity is a big focus for attackers, number one focus, as we've said. Yeah. And I think really being proactive, thinking about how you're protecting every identity broadly, even at a basic level, is a great first step. It's not something just for the SOC to worry about and a detect and respond problem, but it's for identity people to take control and set those rules of the game. So that's my number one piece of advice.
Yeah, and also I think talk to people. Start talking to people in your organization, because a lot of them, even if they have privileged access, they are aware that they have privileged access. They want to secure it the best they can, and sometimes they're limited in the possibilities to protect them. So you have to help them in the best they can. But you have to know what is important to your organization. You have to understand why they do things and why they follow certain procedures. And the only way to learn that is by talking to them. Be there in the company with the boots on the ground and learn from them and then decide on it.
I think you mentioned as well at the Lunch and Learn, collaborate with people in other industries or your own industry.
100%.
There's a lot we can all learn from each other, right?
Yeah, especially in security. We shouldn't keep the security for ourselves. We should teach others and learn and share knowledge in how we secure things and how we approach things. And then they will learn and they will go faster. And then in the end, there are not enough security people for all of them. So if we collaborate, it will be better for all of us.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, they're not unique problems, right? No. And sharing levels that playing field against attackers, I think, is so important. But it can be difficult to find those forums, so you've got to seek it out.
Yeah, good stuff. Right. Thanks, Jos. Thank
you very much.
Good to have you with us. And that's the end of this session. I look forward to seeing you again next time on Xalient Talks.